University, Sherlock Box, brilliant man. He loved to work these things out among the whatever. Now, what was wrong with this was that the man or the men who prepared it had no interest whatsoever in the ancient irrigation works of Ceylon, which are brilliantly documented by R.L. Purohit and subsequently by Arumugam. My God, man, don't you understand what I am saying? I am an octogenarian. I have been with this situation for 60 years. And the chairman of the water board very, conveniently found time to go away. I wish he was here. Who is doing this? I ask you, I ask all of you, I challenge all of you, who are much younger than me, to investigate into this thing, find out who is doing this. If people are robbing money, let them rob, but let them not destroy our economic heritage. Our economic heritage is this ancient system called the ancient irrigation system, but which are actually water and soil conservation ecosystems. And please allow me to say it, this has been understood by two great scientists outside this country. One was Joseph Needham. I worked with him in Cambridge as a British Council scholar for a short time. And the other was Joseph Rotblat. There's a book, Keeper of the Nuclear Conscience, published 3 months ago, Life of Joseph Rotblat. Now I have put in my CV, I have put in my CV, but you guys said about it. That's why. Thank you, Asanka. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. D. Mendis. He has contributed to the water sector of the country for many decades, and in time to come also we hope that he might be able to help the leaders of this country with a lot of ideas and projects. I think this is the time has come for the Q&A session. If you have any questions to be discussed by the panel, identify yourself and ask your questions in short.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Vimal Nirmaladasa. I would like to share very briefly with you some of my experience here in Sri Lanka and globally relating to water security and water safety. I remember back in 1995 September, we had the World 44th Food Production Conference held in Beijing. As you all know, every year the Hudson Institute of United States of America, they predict the food security for the world and the regions. The keynote speaker started his story, the speech like this. There was an ancient king by the name of King Parakram Babi in a country called Ceylon. I don't know the current name of that country. He said like that. He said, food security is water security. So most developed and developing countries are now using the principles, approaches and the methodologies of the irrigation system developed and implemented by him. So this is one experience I think relevant to what you have said.
What country was he from?
This was held in Beijing. No, he's an American from the Hudson Institute of the United States of America. So from there, I would like to share some of my experiences and heavily involved in the plantation sector here and in other countries. We don't talk about the crop yields now. We talk about the water yields. We are concentrating on water harvesting systems, natural systems, short rotating topics, the water economies. So from there I would like to bring it to the water safety side. Currently I am heavily involved in updating the National Chemical Profile of Sri Lanka. back in 2001, our chemical usage, the imports, were 260 kilos per capita. It shot up to 660 kilos, equivalent to almost 13 million tons of chemicals in the year 2011. So, if you take chemical imports alone, it is 14% of all our imports. So from that, I'll just give you a brief example. In the 2001, we imported only 500,000 tons of fertilizers. In the 2011, we touched 1 million mark. Something interesting. In the 2001, we imported only 49,000 tons of triple superphosphate. But in the year 2011, we have imported 190,000 tons of triple superphosphate. That's a four-fold increase. The next question is, have we increased our root crops? Usually phosphorus is being used for root crops. Have we increased that? So then what about the rest of the other chemicals? So we have almost imported 49,000 tons of pesticides, meaning fungicides, herbicides and insecticides. It's true, we all know that all of these things have heavy metals like cadmium, arsenic and all these things. Another question, the WHO Commission, which I asked a month ago, which is very relevant to Dr. Darugunwal. These areas, in these committees, they did not have soil scientists, mineralogists, soil chemists. Then all these things are being applied to soil. So from the soil it is taken up by the plants. So the soil mineralogy, the soil geology had not been studied. Other thing is the absorption and desorption of these heavy metals have not been addressed. So these issues are also to be studied. So these are some of my experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, yes.
Hi, my name is Faisal. I want to know from Dr. Darugunwal if there was any connection between surface and subsurface water and deep groundwater. And also, if there is, in the deep groundwater that we do have, is it recharged by rainfall or is it fossil water? Is there any fossil water? And in your opinion, how much of deep groundwater can be extracted before an environmental impact assessment should be done? I know the Act says 500,000 cubic meters, but I'm asking you for your opinion. What should it be at before the
Okay, to answer to your first question, yes, there is a likely connection between shallow groundwater and deep groundwater. But of course, it varies from place to place and type of aquifer, type of geology to geology. There are some places where, like I showed the duck well and the tube well, they are located in the same area, and there are, if the rock is fractured, the shallow groundwater that you get from the duck wells is connected with the deep groundwater that occurs at deep fractures. These fractures may be 700 meters deep, but still there is ionic connection. In sedimentary areas, of course, there is no direct connections because there are different layers confining the upper water and lower water. So there the system is different. Then the water that we have, all groundwaters are meteorite water. There are no fossil water in our geology. Then the last question that you asked was
the extraction of deep groundwater. What do you think, at which level point do you think an EIA should be required? How many liters?
Even for, say, uncontrolled extraction of water, though it is shallow in the deep, definitely there will be environmental impacts. But it depends on how much you extract and the way you extract, how low you are going to extract. So, the legislation according to this is 50,000 cubic meters, so
500,000.
500,000. It has no scientific basis. It is just a figure of age. Nobody has given any reason to why this figure is the suitable figure. That's not the case.
In your opinion, then what would be a minimum before EIA would be required?
I would say that any amount could be possible, but there should be a certain distribution of the sources. The extraction sources should be distributed in such a way that one is not affected by abstracting of the other. So the distance matters. Then in certain areas, especially in sedimentary areas, it should be possible to extract large quantities. But in crystalline areas, which covers about 90% of the country, the ground, although we want to abstract, groundwork will not allow you to abstract water. Because the water is forced by the gravitational force and the intermolecular attraction and capillary forces. So in a saturated zone, you can abstract that water because the gravitational forces are more effective. So the water, when you empty the well, water will go into the well. But when the gravitational force exceeds, the soil will not allow that water to come into the well. It will keep that water as suspended water, which is the water that is absorbed by the plants, the suction by plant rootlets and so on. So there is a certain natural control. But of course, when you lower the water table, the unsaturated zone thickness will become more. So there are some plants that their roots have gone into the saturated zone. These plants, that category of plants will be affected. So of course, when there is a water abstraction project so on, there should be some kind of environmental impact assessments to be done.
Altogether, I mean completely. Any water extraction at all should have an EIA. Is that what you are saying?
Your question is not
No, what you said at the end.
Whether you need an EIA for water extraction.
not for all, no. I don't think so.
So at what level, at which point?
If it is for industrial purposes, continuous purposes, even for water supply purposes in large scale, it should be done. And also especially in areas where the conditions are unconfined, more abstraction can cause infiltration of contaminants, seawater intrusion and all these things. So
No, I realize that a safe yield test or something like that could be extracted, could be strong.
yeah, safe yield is the yield that you can take from a particular well, but it is not the amount that you can take from an aquifer.
I know, but the legislation in the country to prevent over-extraction of a particular aquifer. I mean, the companies or whoever is concerned will always quote the environmental regulations that we have in the law. But from a scientific perspective, you're saying 500,000 cubic meters is an arbitrary figure that somebody just put there. What figure would you recommend as being something over which the EIA might be used by?
Right,
As an expert, I'm asking.
well, for the areas like, let's say, Jaffna, Muladhu, up to Putla, that figure, 500,000 or 5, you said
500,000 cubic meters.
meters per day, from which, I would say, say, 1 square kilometer area, yes, it is.
The environment regulations just say that prescription for EIA only arises on deep groundwater extraction over 500,000 cubic meters.
But just imagine now, if you have 10 wells within 500 meter distance and each well is pumping 500,000, I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to visualize the consequences.
Yeah, it's just Chairman of the Water Board is here to say that he has agreed to supply Indians on the water. Yeah, for Pradesha, I'm a court about it. I've got 2 court cases against thousands of work over extraction. Pradesha. Dabur Lanka is planning to extract 3.96 million liters of water per month. And send it to India. Package the fruit trees sent to India. So government is just rolled over and said, fine.
My name is Dr. Pereira. I'm a nutritionist by profession. I would just like to make a comment with activity in Sri Lanka. In fact, it has reference to 270 water security, which is very true. In fact, what has happened is now we have relied on Western knowledge. Now I know as a nutritionist who's playing in UK, today I have lots of concerns, very serious concerns about the Western way of looking at food and agriculture. And so one of the biggest problems is now with the so-called green revolution, we were told that we need to go for hybrid varieties. And it is the hybrid varieties that need such a huge agrochemical input. So which has resulted in the CKD issue in the NCP. So we need to really get back to our native. I know we have a wonderful hydrological system in Sri Lanka introduced by Balakrishna Bahu the Great and all the great kings in this country, which was just referred to. And similarly, currently I'm not sure exactly about the numbers, but we've had over 2,000 varieties of native varieties of rice. And our native breeds do not need these agrochemical inputs. They are organically grown. And we need to revive this. And in fact, there are small pockets. In fact, when I finished my PhD in England, I realized that we are trained in a vertical model. As Western scientists, we are trained in a vertical model. And we are literally made blind to the total picture. So though I knew much about human nutrition, I did not know how, we were not trained, or we were not taught how my food was grown and how the food is processed. So we are dying today because of all these complex issues, and so when we talk about water security and all that, I think we really need to now go back to our traditional varieties of rice and also other traditional varieties of other foods, say cereals and other foods, etc. So number two, I would just like to mention to Dr. Baba, I know you presented very much information about the water quality in relation to microbiological quality. So we are, I think, so many decades behind time because most of the deaths are not occurring not because of the bacterial quality. We need to analyze the pesticide and the agrochemical content in water. So now the deaths are already taking place in NCB because of the chronic renal diseases. Now we don't know how much cancers are caused. Various other diseases are also being caused due to agrochemicals in water. So I think I would like to make a request to Dr. Pawar to take this issue with the Health Ministry. And number three, and one of the issues I think that was not discussed, I think Faisal touched briefly, water privatization needs to be prevented. And in fact, the global kind of the companies coming into Sri Lanka, I think we need to be very careful. And as voters, as citizens, I think we have to be very proactive. Because once our water sources are privatized, I think it will be too late for all of us. Thank you.
I just want to say one little thing. I think, I'm really agreeing with her on this issue of the pesticides because two issues. One is, we know that the pesticides are taken up from the soil by the plants, vegetables or maybe fruits even, and we do not have enough of testing being done as to the residual level. The last test was done by me in 1995 or something, long time ago, and then to find that most of our or the leafy vegetables have a higher residual level than what the WHO standards say we should have. As I said earlier, the biggest problem we have is in the laboratories. To get one sample tested costs a huge amount of money. And therefore, I think these are issues that we need to really address. I think everyone, I was at another forum recently and they talked about the impact of the pesticides on the soil and how much the soil is degrading. So I think, since there's a lot of people here who are working on similar issues, one of the most important things I think we need to work on is checking what is really coming into the country as pesticides. Do we really need this? Can we really understand what these pesticides are? Because some of these pesticides are so cleverly made that the instrumentations can't even detect what they are. So we need to really develop on that.
One small comment about the analysis of vegetables and agriculture. So we did that in our study on CKDU in North Central Province. So we had to send these specimens to Belgium. In fact, it's a very costly thing. In fact, very recently, so we have done this test on the different food items that pass the soil, water, and etc.
In fact, I'm very much aware. I know that these tests are very expensive. To forget the pesticides, we can't get food samples unless in Sri Lanka. Nobody is doing that as consumers or consumer lobbies. Now, various food products are marketed in Sri Lanka. Just take the milk powder. When the melamine issue came, what happened? consumers, whether it's water, whether it's food, we have a responsibility, and most people are not concerned about what's happening in the country.
You know, you spoke about sea. Next to water, the most important, in my opinion, as a layperson, is seed. In India, he's still living. There was a famous rice scientist called Dr. Vicharya. I think he's 100 years old now. And he was in charge of the Madhya Pradesh Rice Research Institute. And I have to mention names, right? And another scientist by the name of Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, who had some political clout and whatever, managed to take all the seed. There was supposed to be 10,000 varieties of rice or something. I mean, can't believe these things. Confiscated or whatever, took it all over from Richardia and gave it to the US government to set up the International Rice Research Institute in Manila. Okay? Now, if you want to know on this wonderful online business, Google search Swami's Capers. Swami's Capers, C-A-P-E-R-S, you'll find the whole story there. But this guy, I know him personally, had a lot of clout power in the system. Okay? And today he is a member of the upper house of Rajya Sabha in India. And he was the previous president of the Pagwash conferences. That's how I know him. On Science and World Affairs. Now, Jayanta Dhanapala succeeded him in 2007. Now, at that time, the general sort of loose talk in Pagwash was that these guys were going after two Nobels. One for peace and one for agriculture. He got right.
After this was wasn't a condition of university and the Rice Institute that everybody wanted those varieties back in the future.
Not to us to India, but you know, it's big. It's in India, much bigger than ours. And you know.
Thank you very much. I would like to mention a few things about the CKD and the pesticides. Actually, I am the first person who went to the courts relating to the pesticides, and I was able to confiscate and do certain things related to the pesticides. And we filed 3 cases against the pesticides, and some are still pending. And the ideas raised by you are very important, and related to pesticides, we all should take a lot of steps. And natural varieties of farming, natural varieties are also started by small groups. We must encourage them. I think it's, time has come to terminate the session 2. Therefore, I would like to thank all of our panelists, because most of us, most of the audience, they are also want to discuss. And thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you very much, Chairman of Session 2, and all our speakers as well. So with that, we conclude the second and final session.